Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Luke Johnson from Noetic. Let me decrease my feedback here. And tonight I'm back with my dear friend CJ Eller, and we are doing another installment. Yes, I say another, even though you may have missed it. We talked
Aw,
earlier about JFK's In Memoriam by Borges, but unfortunately we had some technical difficulties.
it was my fault.
So, no, don't. I wasn't going to tell them. I wasn't going to tell them. But tonight everything's going to run smooth, hopefully, God willing. And we're going to be talking about, man, I've got so many of these things going on. What are we talking about tonight? We were talking about Borges' Kafka and his precursors. I have a feeling I'm going to be spending a lot of time with Borges. It's very relevant to a lot of the book research that I'm doing. Um, you know, I find these to be immensely rewarding because there are many Borgesian breadcrumbs to larger topics that interconnect variety of different authors, filmmakers, and I just love seeing the net of ideas emerge from these. So, uh, yeah, I mean, obviously, Kafka and his precursors jumped out at me. I have a profound interest in Kafka, though I know very little about him. I really just started learning a great deal in preparation for this, even though we're going to be talking about Borges, which I have to remind myself is um, what stood out to me is that two of my favorite filmmakers, David Lynch and Stanley Kubrick, have an association with Kafka. Uh, Kubrick's and Lynch's movies are both discussed as being Kafka-esque, and they make overt and subtle references to Kafka in their works. And now we've got Borges talking about Kafka. So there's got to be something really, really important going on with Kafka. The guy who talked about not to mention he wrote a book called The Metamorphosis, which is like the only other book I know of that talks about metamorphosizing, and the title is Ovid, as Metamorphosis, and he turned into a beetle, and beetles are very important as well. If you understand the alchemical puzzle language that a lot of these things are threaded with. So Kafka is a big, big hub of interest for me. Why did you like this one, CJ?
I think it is a piece that helps one understand Borges's mind a little more because a lot of the time when we talk about Borges, we think about his literary works, his fiction, his poetry, but his nonfiction, his essays, of which Kafka and his precursors is one of them, are also immensely important to understanding the encyclopedic mind of Borges. And I think for me, this piece not only gives me an appreciation for Kafka's work and a little more context maybe into his, quote unquote precursors, but I think it also helps me understand other pieces, or at least when I say pieces, I mean short stories of Borges that perhaps I had one idea of what they meant, but now I'm getting another interpretation of them that maybe we can discuss later. But that's what I got from this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it does not disappoint. It's a fantastic piece, both in its particulars and in its overarching theme. So let's just jump right into it. Um,
Yeah. No, I think maybe if you want, just really briefly, if we could just go over maybe just Borges' connection to Kafka real fast. I think at least I get a lot of information from Rex Butler's paper called "Rereading Kafka and His Precursors," which I found on JSTOR. Really great piece. I would recommend you looking that up. But at least from him, I gleaned that Borges' exposure to Kafka started around 1917. So he's about 18 years old when he started reading Kafka. And then he carried Kafka throughout his literary career. So it started with translating Kafka parables. I believe one of them was Before the Law was one of the parables that he translated for a literary magazine. He's translated some of Kafka's short stories for collections. And then beyond the translations, we have him just laying out all of these different Kafka references in his short stories. And that's at least what I was able to find from just an immediate, just like background of, hey, this is Borges' relation to Kafka, as far as publishing, as far as translating goes. So
Right. No, I think that's very important. I'm glad you brought that into consideration and
right,
brought
because when I read like, oh, I once premeditated making a study of Kafka's precursors, we're like, oh, like you once thought about that. Like, when did you start thinking about that? And oh, he could have started thinking about that when he was 18 years old. When he was a little younger, trying to think about, like where does Kafka come from? Who is he? What what
yeah,
what are his influences?
right, right. Um, I appreciate that background because I really couldn't tell you what you just told everybody about when Borges had first contact with Kafka. Um, I, I'm trying to think what's the best way for us to get going through this. It's too long, I think, probably to do line by line, which we've done. I think we did with the JFK.
Right. Yeah, I think what we can do, Luke, is that perhaps maybe we can start with maybe go by paragraph, because at least the
Yeah,
first paragraph is an introduction, just so people have an idea. It's an introduction to this idea of making a study, as what he calls it, of Kafka's precursors. And then he just goes right into it. He goes right into at least, a collection of a couple of what he deems as Kafka's um, precursors. And then finally, he kind of ends it with this. It's almost not even a paragraph. It's just a couple sentences that just hits you like like Borges does. It's just like a couple sentences, and you're like, "What? What did you just say?" That I think the implications of which we can maybe spend most of the podcast talking about. But I think,
sure.
does
Well,
that
let's
make
take
sense?
yeah, it's totally. So let's take turns reading the paragraphs. Would you? And what we'll do is if there's something important about what occurs in that paragraph, we'll
Hmm.
chime in. Okay.
Sure.
So would you like to read the first one?
Sure, yeah. And I at least want to be mindful of whose translation we are using to begin this. I believe we do not have the translation at hand, but or at least the translator. But let me see if I can just do a quick.
Mine is supposedly done by JEI, whoever that is.
Ah, okay, gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe
The copy
that's
that we're looking at.
we will take that we will take that and go with it then. That's totally fine. I just want to give credit where it's due. That we have to remember that Borges is a South American writer and he's writing in Spanish, so it's one of those things
This
that we're just
this is
kind
an interesting thing. I haven't had a chance to spiral on it, but we have all these different translators
of.
of Borges's works.
Hmm.
Um, this one's done by JEI. I don't know who JEI is. So there's a whole study that I'm sure exists out there. And
Hmm.
if anyone has that information, please put them in the comments wherever you're listening to this about the different translators and why it's broken up the way that it is. But I
Yeah.
have no idea who JEI is. I should have
N-
looked it up.
No, that's okay. I mean, that's something maybe we can dive in in a future podcast for
Sure.
sure. But yeah, I'll just start off with JEI's translation. I once premeditated making a study of Kafka's precursors. At first, I had considered him to be as singular as the phoenix of rhetorical praise. After frequenting his pages a bit, I came to think I could recognize his voice, or his practices, in texts from diverse literatures and periods. I shall record a few of these here in chronological order. So he's
Thank you.
setting us up, saying I thought Kafka was this one in a million, this phoenix of rhetorical praise, and actually I think I can trace a thread, and he's going to try to trace this thread of Kafka's precursors.
Learning to connect dots can take you to some strange places. So
I mean, this piece goes a lot of different places for sure.
caution, caution, you're entering the dot connecting zone.
Hmm.
So the only thing that I really have to say about this is I wanted to point out the implement. Borges is very careful about the words that he uses. And the word that jumped off the page here is that he talks about the phoenix of rhetorical praise.
Hmm.
Uh, for those who understand that the phoenix is a mythological symbol, usually symbolizing death and rebirth in a number of ancient cultures, but it's also a symbol within Freemasonry. Manly P. Hall, which he was inducted as an honorary 33rd degree Freemasonry, said this about the phoenix: "These were the immortals to whom the term phoenix was applied, and their symbol was the mysterious two-headed bird, now called an eagle, a familiar and little understood Masonic emblem.
Hmm.
So I just thought that was interesting that he chose that. He may have been speaking mythologically. He may be alluding to something else. I'll allow the audience to determine whether or not they should look further into what the phoenix means.
Yeah, and to give maybe more context, the phoenix was also this figure, at least I believe, in classical, at least when we think of classical as in Greek and Roman times, as well as early Christianity and out
There's
of
no
kind of being
phoenix.
this.
There's no phoenix in the Bible.
But there is apparently in Christianity, at least maybe in other sources, probably like
May,
Pope
not the
Clement the
Bible.
First. Okay, I got fair enough. Or Isidore of Seville. I'm not really sure. I mean, just some scholars and other
Well,
folks that have used this, but it just seems like it's a symbol that has been, like Borges is. It seems very ripe for Borges because it's this thing that is transmuted and transmigrated throughout time to when he's writing it now. So yeah.
Let me clarify what I said there. It's not in the King James version of the Bible, which I
Mm,
read. So I can only talk
gotcha.
about. It's not. I don't believe it's in the NIV as well. But
Gotcha.
so
No,
it may exist in another translation that I'm not
yeah.
familiar
No, I'm
with.
curious also, at least on a lot of what I've used has just been more just from cursory glances. So I'm curious at least to the other sources, when they say, okay, Pope Clement the First uses the phoenix maybe in some of his writings, like what does that mean and all of that as well. But yeah, it's just to give a little more, just fleshing out what you said there. Yeah, so that jumped out to you. I don't think I have anything really else. Do we want to start with the first precursor of Kafka?
Yeah, and I think let's just I'll just read the whole thing with the footnote too, if that's okay.
Yeah, that
And
sounds
it's
great.
it'll be a lot, but we'll break it down. We'll go line by line for things that we think that are interesting.
Okay.
So all right. So the first is Zeno's paradox against movement. A moving object at A, declares Aristotle, cannot reach point B because it must first cover half the distance between the 2 points. And before that, half of the half. Before that, half of the half of the half, and so on to infinity. The form of this illustrious problem is exactly that of the castle, and the moving object and the arrow and Achilles are the first Kafkian characters in literature. In the second text, which chance laid before me, the affinity is not one of form, but one of tone. It is an apologue of Han Yu, a prose writer of the 9th century, and is reproduced in, well, excuse my French, Marguerite's admirable Anthologie raisonnée de la littérature chinoise, 1948. This is the paragraph, mysterious and calm, which I marked. It is the odes, annals, biographies of illustrious men, and other texts whose authority is unquestionable. Even children and village women know that the unicorn constitutes a favorable presage. But this animal does not figure among the domestic beasts, is not always easy to find, does not lend itself to classification. It is not like the horse or the bull, the wolf or the deer. In such conditions, we could be face to face with a unicorn and not know for certain that it was. We know that such and such an animal with a mane is a horse, and that such and such an animal with horns is a bull, but we do not know what the unicorn is like. And then we have a footnote. Non recognition of the sacred animal and its opprobrious or accidental death at the hands of the people are traditional themes in Chinese literature. See the last chapter of Jung's Psychologie und Alchemie, Zurich, 1944, which contains 2 curious illustrations. So we should be getting the hint here that we're dealing with alchemists. Okay. I think it's very important for everybody to learn what alchemy is. You'll understand this on another level that the average person won't. And unlike the word phoenix, the unicorn is actually in the Bible. And most Christians don't even know that. The unicorn appears in the Bible 9 times, but it's not the unicorn that you're thinking of. So we'll get to that later. So I'm going to hand it back to CJ to talk about the first ancestor
Yeah.
of Kafka,
Yeah.
Zeno.
Yeah. We're dealing with the Zeno's paradox, and I think this is a great start because we're dealing with this dread of Kafka, which is seen a lot in his works, is this idea of not being able to make it to a destination. When Borges references the castle, we're dealing with a piece that's we can already spoil it because it's sort of known at this point that
It's
it
like unspoilable, isn't it?
yeah, well, maybe yeah, that's true. It wasn't finished, which I guess is another
Yeah.
nod to Zeno. But just so we have context, the castle is about this character named Kay who tries to gain entrance into this castle, but never does, and keeps running into just issues and bureaucracy here and there, and it's all of this kind of context is littered throughout Kafka's work, from his parables to his short stories of just people trying to get somewhere and not being able to make it. And I think it's fitting for Borges to kind of start on a philosophical note and to say, well, this is just canceling motion. That like motion, Zeno's paradox is against movement. It's saying movement is impossible. Um, it reminds me of a Kafka short story where this it might as well be Kafka is on the street and he's asking a policeman like, "Can you tell me the way to this place I need to go?" And the guy says, "The way? Give it up. Give it up." And he just walks away and starts laughing. And it just Zeno's paradox to me is was like that policeman where it's just saying, "Motion, give it up. It's impossible. You can't do that." So that's at least what I have. I think
Well,
it's a
I think it's important.
philosophical representation of that dread that we get in Kafka's work of trying to get to a destination and just having that destination almost be impossible to get to. So,
I think it's important to point out that there isn't just one paradox of Zeno. Okay,
mm,
and this is something most people are like, oh, I understand what Zeno's paradox is. So you keep going half, 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 and you never really arrive at your destination there.
mm-hmm.
But this is counterintuitive because motion seems to be a real thing in our life. So
my
so
favorite refutation of that I think was uh, some Greek philosopher just standing up and walking away when they were
yeah,
having an argument with that, just saying like, "I'll prove you motion and I'll walk out of this conversation." So yeah,
right.
I know what you mean.
So there's like this disconnect between abstraction and like lived experience. But
Mm-hmm.
Zeno, uh, is not only denying motion,
Mm.
he's also going to be denying time.
Mm.
Okay, and these things are interconnected. And now I don't understand. I apparently Zeno was from the school of Parmenides, and I don't know enough about that philosophical system to speak extensively about it. But I do want you to know that there are four paradoxes of Zeno, and I think, to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
Borges wants you to know this as well because he references them all. So there's the
Oh,
one that we're talking about where you're having the distance. That's called Zeno's paradox. It's the dichotomy.
okay.
Okay, and then there's the paradox of the tortoise in the hare, or Achilles in the hare, I should say,
Mm-hmm.
where the tortoise is given a head start and
Right.
Achilles, this great warrior from the Trojan War, is incapable,
Right.
logically speaking, to overtake the tortoise.
And is that because of the half of the he has to go half of the distance, half of
It's
the
a
half of
little
the
bit more
half?
complicated.
Okay.
I'm trying to. It's and I'll have to reference it. I'll
No
have to look
problem.
over it when I'm not trying to talk and speak at the same time.
Of course.
Then the third one is called the arrow.
Mm.
Okay, and this is to deny that an arrow is actually like flying through space time.
Oh, that it's actually moving. Okay.
Yeah, and then there's a fourth one. What is the fourth one? The fourth one. Oh, I'm missing my. I did find the second one. The second one here is Achilles and the tortoise.
Hmm.
Um,
And you already said about the arrow that it's
yeah,
not actually in motion, it's just at rest in different places, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I have so many notes on this thing. I'm having struggle.
You're
Why don't you
good.
take
It's no
while I
problem.
look for it? Why don't you do the talking?
No, you're good. I mean, I think it's a acknowledgement of Zeno or of Kafka in action, where we're trying to finish we're trying to find the fourth one and we can't find it.
You should
It
see my
is
Google Doc.
it
It's
is
like
unfinished. Yeah.
it's
It,
so amazing here.
no, it is dense. I
Interestingly enough, uh, Lewis Carroll also dealt with the Zenoian paradox of the tortoise and Achilles. He wrote a piece called "Tortoise Said to Achilles," which I highly recommend people taking a look at.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think it's and maybe to go off on what you're saying, I think maybe just finish focusing on that last thing, that Borges kind of says that, oh, like the arrow and Achilles are kind of the first Kafkian characters of literature. And I can't help but also think of that this is almost in the vein of Kafka-esque, because maybe to connect it back to Kafka, he has a short story that we talked about, I believe, on the podcast called Poseidon, where you have this god of the sea who is ruling the oceans, but he can't get to the ocean because he has an ungodly amount of paperwork to do, and he can't get out of this paperwork because that's what he has to do. And so it just reminds me of Achilles fitting that same mold. We have one of the greatest of all Greek warriors, immortalized throughout the ages, who can't even catch up to a tortoise, right? It's just, again, this dread of just not being able to get to where you want to go, whether it's Poseidon getting to the ocean, and then here we have, Achilles trying to catch up to the tortoise to show that he is, the strongest man in all of Greece, but he can't even outpace a tortoise.
Right.
It's
Well, I went back to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and
excellent.
the fourth Zenoian paradox is called the stadium,
Okay.
and it involves moving bodies. It's very complex. I'm not even going to get
Mm,
into it, but
okay.
for those who want to go back and look at it, it's called the stadium.
No, please
Now,
do. So I think this also, then you're going to look at it in a Kafka sense. You'll be like, huh, interesting. Like, how is this like Kafka?
well, so something I think we need to define
Hmm.
is you mentioned earlier how Borges says that the Arrow and Achilles are the first Kafkian characters.
Yeah.
And I mentioned David Lynch and Stanley Kubrick, and people say, oh, those are Kafkian film directors. And
Yeah.
there's sort of this implicit understanding of what something means to be Kafka-esque.
Yes.
And
What does that mean, Luke?
but explicitly, it's like trying to define irony, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
so I think we ought to pause for a second and try to define what it means to be Kafkian.
Hmm.
I actually took to looking it up, but why don't you tell people what you think Kafka-esque means?
Yeah. I think that's sort of the
Don't
point.
look at my notes because I want to. Don't
Oh.
steal my thunder.
Oh. Well, I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'm going to let you have your thunder, but I at least want to maybe bring up something that we're going to talk about later. But I think this is the whole point of this text, is what does Kafka-esque mean? And, we can accumulate, we're kind of accumulating these different ideas of what Kafka-esque could mean as we talk about these precursors. But I just think it's interesting that we kind of start out with like, what does Kafka-esque mean? And I think that's what Borges is trying to do in this work. And we'll see if he's successful. We'll see if maybe not, maybe like Kafka's characters, we won't be successful. But I just wanted to maybe give that meta analysis of
Well,
just saying,
let's talk about it a little bit. Let me.
yeah, please give
Interestingly,
us like a Merriam-Webster
yeah,
definition.
I'm actually going to quote Merriam-Webster
Yes,
here because
perfect.
it is actually, thankfully, defined for us.
Yes.
So Kafkaesque, of relating to or suggestive of Franz Kafka. This is super helpful, right?
Right.
Or his writings especially. But here's where it gets good. Having a nightmarishly complex, bizarre, or illogical quality, Kafka or like Kafkaesque bureaucratic delays, like you mentioned with the castle, which by
Hmm.
the way, I got like 75% through in the 6 days that we had to prepare for this.
Impressive.
Well, I don't fully understand. It's going to take a lot more research and when interestingly enough, Thomas Mann in the like definitive edition of the Castle actually did the foreword, and Thomas Mann's going to be a major player, at least on this channel and podcast and platform, going forward. I've been recently introduced to him, and he's sort of changing the way that I see things.
No, that's
Now,
great.
so 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 to me, what makes the Zenoian paradoxes Kafkaesque, what makes the arrow and
Hmm.
Achilles Kafkaesque is it's illogical. Like you were talking
Yes.
about the philosopher who walked up walked out as a refutation
Right.
of Zeno. But I don't think that's enough, to be honest. When
Mm.
you start really contemplating the Zenoian paradoxes, like where you're denying motion and time, yes, it's off camera before I started talking. Before we started recording this, I was talking to CJ. Something I want to reiterate to the audience here. Whether you're reading the Bible or Borges or the Constitution of the United States, whatever the thing you're reading, it's going to mean something different depending on your level of consciousness and understanding. Okay. So if I return to this Borges text 10 years from now with all the knowledge that I've accrued, it's going to mean something entirely different. Similarly, the more you work at the Bible, you're going to wring out more and more and more meaning, right? Um, so as I contemplate the Zenoian paradoxes, it's not just that they're potentially incoherent, they do bring with them a certain sort of nausea,
Hmm.
don't you think? Like trying to contemplate like how I could be having the distance but never arrive at where I'm trying to go, or imagining this arrow just kind of being absorbed by blocks of space-time but actually not moving. Like I'm not sure that's exactly what the arrow is communicating. I haven't spiraled on it, but to deny the obvious of what you're perceiving with your God-given senses in and have that tension between abstracted truth and lived experience, I think creates a sense of the uncanny. And these things, although they aren't scary, like, oh, I'm imagining Achilles racing a tortoise, like
Right.
there's nothing scary about that. But the more and more I think about it, it does start to become kind of like a bad dream. It does it
Yes.
does start to feel uncanny, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it does, and a lot of Kafka's stories have that kind of nausea, like you're saying, or just that dreamy, or I should say dream, a nightmare-ish quality. There's one in particular that I think highlights this the most. If anybody wants to read it when they get a chance, it's called An Imperial Message. It's almost like a parable. It's very short, but it's this story that has the frame of a person, you're a person, and you receive this message from the king who is dying. And he says, okay, I want to make sure you got this message. Great, you got this message. Go and deliver it to this person. And Kafka takes you through, and it's like you go through these crowds of people, and it's almost impossible to get through. And then you have to get through these doors, but the doors are numberless. And then you have to get outside the castle gates, but even the gates are numberless. And if I can just quote him, at least the translation that I have, still he is only making his way through the chambers of the innermost palace. Never will he get to the end of them. And if he succeeded in that, nothing would be gained. So it's even this thing of there's just this futility, even if, that might be underlying it as well, that even if Achilles could overtake the tortoise, even if motion was happening, is it all for naught, as Kafka says? Is it something that it would be in vain regardless? So I just wanted to bring
Right.
in Kafka there.
Well,
Just
yeah. I mean, there does seem to be some sort of vanity to
hmm
running races. What's interesting, I was out mowing,
hmm
and these, from what I understand, the Zenoian paradoxes, I believe, were I don't have the timeline memorized, but it's traceable back to like 750 BC, and then Aesop's fables come in around 450 BC. Don't crucify me if I get this wrong. But from
uh-huh.
what I understand, the story of the tortoise and the hare comes from the Zenoian paradox of Achilles.
That would make
And
sense. That
and
would make sense.
so I was out mowing, and this is so interesting because I think it also I want to keep hitting this point home that symbols are messages, and you don't have to get into like a really spooky place with it because I know it kind of upsets people. But I all my life I've been mowing the lawn, and I automatically associate. I have on my lawnmower it has a turtle and a rabbit,
Hmm.
and in my mind's automatically going rabbit fast, turtle slow. Like they're automatically translated because I'm deciphering the hieroglyphic, and I learned that when I was like 5 years old.
Right.
And so all I'm trying to point out here is the Zenoian paradox is still in your world. It's still in something as common as your lawnmower, which
Yeah.
in by the way, as I was contemplating that, I sort of I feel like there's some great futility to mowing lawns. There's some sort of Zenoing paradox to mowing lawns. I don't really understand why we mow lawns. We go in circles and do this, and we do it every week. I like. I don't understand why everybody doesn't just have a garden and grow food, but instead we have grass, and it's got to be cut every week or two, and that's just what we do. And there's like an entire industry built around lawn mowing. And if you dare question it, you're a psychopath. Don't you think mowing the lawn is weird? Like I'm
Oh, I
trying
mean, I
like
have to
what's the
mow the lawn
utilitarian
tomorrow, so yeah, you're making me think of the futility that
it
every
seems like
week I have
and
to.
it's never done. It's
Right.
oh it's like
It's
it can never be finished. It feels like another Zenoian paradox.
No, exactly. And honestly, I think you're spot on with the tortoise and the hare speed. Like the little speedometer on the lawnmower, because I've had that in my lawnmowers in the past. That when I've had to mow my family's lawn, and I think this is actually just in line with Borges and how he would be thinking about these symbols, because he's had some short stories, or I don't even know if you call them short stories, but more like miniatures, if you will, of noticing symbols and saying, "Oh, isn't that interesting? The cross that we would use to crucify Christ is now just on a tomb. It's just a runic cross. Isn't that interesting?" Or, "Oh, that arrow that's pointing to a pharmacy or whatever, what have you, in a city, is actually something that before would be the arrows raining down on the Spartans in Thermopylae." So he already is in that mind frame of seeing symbols and just seeing how they transmigrate throughout time. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to mention how I think we're getting into Borges's mind frame when we're thinking about
Well,
these things.
once you learn how to decode alchemical symbols, if you've seen the movie They Live, the John Carpenter movie, and he's an alchemist as well, you're they symbolize the ability. Once you learn the alchemical language, then you can really read what's all around you. So I would encourage people to really dig in and learn so you can have the X-ray specs and see what's going on around you. But if you don't want to put on those spectacles, you can just see the world as incoherent mess where everything is a coincidence. What I want to say here in my badly butchered French,
Mhm.
what this roughly translates to,
Yeah, so we're
when you say,
moving. We're gonna move on to the next symbol,
yeah,
the
that,
unicorn.
yeah, we're gonna, and I have a lot to say about the unicorn. The it just roughly Margulies's book translates to Reason Anthology of Chinese Literature.
Okay.
Just for anyone who is interested. Um, so he makes this claim that I found questionable. It is universally admitted that the unicorn is a supernatural being of good omen.
Mhm.
Well, that's not that's not good enough for Luke Johnson.
Well,
That's I'm going to find that to be questionable. Now everybody loves a unicorn. Unicorns, unicorns are beautiful. They're these white horses with this majestic horn. So, so they've got magical properties associated with them. You talk to an art historian and say, "Oh, look at this tapestry. The Virgin Mary's cradling this unicorn, and the unicorn is a Christ symbol. Don't you know? Don't you know, Mister Smart Guy, that the unicorn is really a stand-in for Christ?" And for a while, I thought that,
mhm.
I was like, okay. And then I did two things. I went back at the verses that talk about the unicorn in the Bible. First of all, there's to my knowledge there is no association of the unicorn with Christ within the Bible. In fact, the way that the unicorn is portrayed in the Bible, it's almost portrayed as something monstrous. And if you read certain passages like Daniel 8, it could be a prophetic symbol of the Antichrist, actually. And I think that's something that people ought to look into. But the other thing that really got my
Wait,
gears
was that
turning,
who said that? That Antichrist thing? Was that
it's an interpretation of Daniel 8. We
gotcha?
could
Okay.
I can pull. I mean, I would encourage everybody just to read it for themselves.
Okay.
Um, I can. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm saying there are some people who have interpreted it that way.
Okay.
So, look, people interpret the Bible a million different ways. You read Daniel 8 and you figure out what it means. I do not have the gift for decoding prophetic works, but Daniel 8 is one of the most, or Daniel is one of the most prophetic books of the Bible, and it does talk about the unicorn there.
Yeah,
But
and if
the
I could even add to that, it looks like back in at least just to maybe understand like how did the unicorn become this symbol of Christ? It seems like back in AD 200, I think it was Tertullian who called the unicorn a symbol of Christ, and then we have these church fathers such as Ambrose, Jerome,
again, it's not in the Bible.
Basil
That's not in the
agreed.
Bible.
Right,
But
but we're
but
talking about you're talking about interpretations, so we just want
right,
to make sure that even though it is in the Bible, now we're getting into exegesis of the text. So
yeah,
just
yeah.
want to bring
But
it in.
if you look at the actual passages, I don't think you would come to that conclusion. The other thing that makes you not come to that conclusion, and I'm glad I had no idea that this was in this when CJ and I started talking about this. Jung is a big part of this book project that I'm working on for a variety of reasons. Like Jung and Kubrick share the same birthday, and Thomas Mann and Jung share the same death day. Isn't that weird? But uh, the collected writings of Jung, Volume 12, Psychology of Alchemy,
And
is
this is
what
the footnote, right?
right.
This is the
Borges
footnote.
directs us to that. And I'd had this, I've been looking for, I was like, man, I got to read this whole thing. And he directs us to the last chapter where it talks about, it's a whole chapter on unicorns. Did you read it by chance, CJ?
I did not get a chance to read it. I did look at the pictures
Or
that you
we'll talk,
shared.
yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. But um, what Jung talks about in Psychology and Alchemy and the unicorn is that the unicorn, from an alchemical perspective, again, these are alchemists. Like Jung is writing a book called Psychology and Alchemy. Okay. Like
Okay.
this isn't, you're not, no one's hiding this from you. Okay. Go read it. Go read it. Jung goes through quite extensively. It's actually a mind-blowing chapter how how there are all these different traditions of what the unicorn is. There is a Talmudic interpretation of the unicorn, which I would like to relate because it's one of the more fascinating ones. There's a Christian interpretation of what the Christian air quotes
Yeah, what
what the
we've been
unicorn.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a Persian understanding of what the unicorn is. There's a Chinese understanding of what the unicorn is. There's an Indian understanding of what the unicorn is. And they're all sort of similar and they're all sort of different.
Okay.
Okay. But the 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 thing that the thing that I wanted to communicate is that one of the commonalities that goes is transcultural. First, the fact I didn't know there were unicorns in all these different cultures. That's amazing. That's like dragons being in all these different cultures. So you have to ask yourself, why are all these cultures talking about a unicorn? How did that happen? How did they all get the unicorn? It's like, how did all these cultures talk about a flood? How did all these cultures, how are, there's dragons in the Bible and there's dragons in China. How did that happen? I don't propose to have the answer to these things, but I think it's something we need to think about if you've got a universal language here going on. But essentially, the big takeaway from that chapter is that, alchemically speaking, the unicorn is bit of a monstrous, hermaphroditic, undefinable beast.
Mm,
It's not this pretty little horse with a horn on its head.
mm,
Now, in the Talmudic tradition, which I found most interesting, the unicorn is massive, so massive that it wasn't able to fit on the ark. And they say within the Talmudic tradition that the unicorn, because it was so big, it was actually pulling the ark along with the king of Og.
mm,
So you have a giant and a giant monstrous unicorn.
mm.
So these are things I would not have known had Borges not directed my attention to Jung's psychology and alchemy.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious then. You mentioned it is this formless kind of being, or not formless, but it's hard to define. And we have Borges here saying that the affinity to Kafka is not so much on the form that this description from Han Yun takes, but it is one of tone. So what do we think of the tone of this? Is it more so in the sense that we're dealing again with this nauseating, hard to describe, we can't put a finger down on this, monstrous unicorn? Is that it? I kind of think of that last line in Han Yun's description where we know that such and such an animal with a mane is a horse, and that such and such an animal with horns is a bull, but we do not know what the unicorn is like. That it's just somewhere in between, and that it's almost futile to try to say that you've seen a unicorn or that you know what a unicorn is. Is that the Kafka tone that we're getting at with this?
I think whatever the unicorn may be, from whatever cultural perspective that we're looking at, I think the thing that Borges is trying to do here and connecting it back to Kafka and Zeno is that the unicorn lies just beyond our
Mm,
realm of perception. We can sort of start to conceptualize it, but it's hazy, it's fuzzy, and we don't really know it. Like, and this because we have not seen a physical instantiation of it, right? We don't have a concept matching up with empirical data.
mm,
And so we
okay.
can't make that match. Unlike, we have a concept of a bull, we can go back and look at a bull, we can make that match. We have a concept of a horse, we can make that match. We have this like chimerical beast in our mind, but there's this tension where we can't make it match experience.
Mm,
Similar to the Zenoian paradoxes where we can make it work in our mind mentally, but we can't make it match reality. I think
mm.
I think that's the parallel that's being drawn here. There's this massive chasm, this abyss between what we comprehend and what we can actually prove out.
No, that's great, Luke. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's just curious that Borges emphasizes the tone. He's like, I want you to focus on the tone of this. That this is Kafka-esque. Like, if you read this, like, you might as well be reading a bestiary by Franz Kafka. Basically, if we're talking about Kafka's wild and extraordinary beast, that the unicorn would be front and center. So I think that's fascinating in that regard. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about with the unicorn,
Well,
or did we?
I do want to point out if for individuals that do have access, I use a fantastic service called Scribd. Okay.
Okay.
I don't, it's $10 a month. I'm not being paid to promote this at all. It's just like a game changer for me because it
Mm,
has, I use it in combination with Audible, and it has tons of audiobooks that aren't on Audible. And then it has some of the audiobooks that are on Audible, but you
that's
get them as a
fantastic.
part of your membership. And it's not just audiobooks, it has research papers, it has books. I mean,
Mm,
it's I'd say the best $10 I ever spent was for an app called Voice Stream, which has a robot voice that will read anything to you that
mm,
you can find on the internet or that you can take pictures of. And it's Scribd. Scribd is $10 a month. You can just do it through PayPal or whatever. And it's incredible in terms of the resources that you have access to.
mm,
And one of them is that I can actually on my computer read the psychology and alchemy. I have a out of control spending habit on books, and I really want to throw down $30 for a copy of Jung's Psychology and Alchemy, but I have a digital version, so I'm trying to restrain myself.
Yeah, no,
But
for sure. And I mean, this is where people can also look at the picture, correct? That
exactly,
Borges mentions. Yeah.
yeah. So and so you, I can't show them to you, but you can go look at them. What's very interesting is that Borges has said, "Go find this book, go look at the pictures." And as someone who's seen them, the I don't know exactly what Borges is what he wants us to point out about these images of unicorns from Chinese culture. Now, apparently, the images I believe were made in like the 18th century,
Okay.
but but the it's even hard to tell what you're looking at. It's
Mm,
like it looks kind of like a dragon. It kind of looks like a wolf. It kind of looks like a stag.
I agree.
Um,
Yeah.
it's 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 fuzzy. To be honest, it's hard to comprehend what I'm looking at.
Exactly.
And
It is Kafka-esque in that way, right?
yeah, and the only other thing that I thought was interesting about it is just to circle back around to the mention of the Masonic symbol of the phoenix that was in the first two
Beginning.
lines. There's another Masonic symbol within these images of the unicorns. One of the images has the Moses pavement or the tessellated floor that you would see in a Masonic lodge. So I think that's very interesting. Again, we have to ask ourselves, how did this tessellated floor pattern show up in Chinese art? Do people just like black and white tessellated floors? Do people,
Yeah,
or why is this universal? Where does this come from? Is this traceable to King Solomon? What's going on here?
right. Yeah, no, that is interesting. I didn't really realize the floors. Yeah, it almost looks like a kitchen floor or something in
Yeah,
these paintings. Yeah, with the patterns there. Yeah, it could
it's called
be
it's called Moses pavement. I
Moses
don't know what it's
pavement. That's
I
the
don't know what
pattern.
it's yeah, I don't know what it's
Okay.
called in Chinese, but
Yeah.
and
Well, it could be
yeah.
something like these other, like the unicorn. It could be this, cross-cultural symbol that goes through time. But
Well, then we have to ask ourselves, why do the same symbols why are the Chinese talking about unicorns and dragons and have Moses pavement when, you know, these are Western, these are supposedly Western things, right? So
yeah,
how did that happen?
supposedly, I mean, we're learning more and more. Even at least I do all the time, even of our Eastern influence as well. Thinking. I mean, even just something like gunpowder. Comes from the west, from the east, and yeah, just a lot of things that I don't even think about or I take for granted that come from those traditions. But anyways, the
Why
next
don't we move on
paragraph,
to, yeah,
yeah,
why don't you read the third one?
okay, yeah. So I think what I'll do, I'll just read the third precursor, and then we'll talk about that, and then we'll go on to the next ones. The third text derives from a more easily predictable source, the writings of Kierkegaard. The spiritual affinity of both writers is something of which no one is ignorant. What has not yet been brought out, as far as I know, is the fact that Kierkegaard, like Kafka, wrote many religious parables on contemporary and bourgeois themes. Lowry, in his Kierkegaard, that's Oxford University Press 1938, transcribes two of these. One is the story of a counterfeiter who, under constant surveillance, counts banknotes in the Bank of England. In the same way, God would distrust Kierkegaard and have given him a task to perform precisely because he knew that he was familiar with evil. The subject of the other parable is the North Pole expeditions. Danish ministers had declared from their pulpits that participations in these expeditions were beneficial to the soul's eternal well being. They admitted, however, that it was difficult and perhaps impossible to reach the pole, and that not all men could undertake the adventure. Finally, they would announce that any trip from Denmark to London, let us say, or on a regularly scheduled steamer, was, properly considered, an expedition to the North Pole.
Wow, there's a lot to say here.
Yeah,
I mean, look, I should. I don't know how much I want to spend on this. I mean, if anyone knows me, I did my dissertation on Kierkegaard.
yes, this is
Uh,
your bread and
this
butter.
Well, it was. I've kind of overcome it, and I don't really think about Kierkegaard a lot these days, but
Hmm.
it's looking more and more like I'm going to have to revisit it, given that Kierkegaard seems to be part of this alchemical puzzle language. And I've never heard about Kierkegaard and Kafka being associated with one another except for like a general sort of mood. Maybe that is all that it is. Maybe there is more. So I dug in. I was like, well, what exactly is this spiritual affinity? Is it because both write about bourgeois themes? Is it both because they write about like paradoxes?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's probably it. Now, the paradoxes that they write about are profoundly different. I mean, Kierkegaard is supposedly a committed Christian who's ultimately trying to prepare the minds of individuals for paradoxes so they can comprehend or not comprehend, I should say, the ultimate paradox of God becoming flesh. And Kafka, I mean, Kafka's religious commitments are, from what I understand, hard to pin down. He was an Austro-Hungarian uh, Jewish writer. I think he was an atheist at one point in his life, maybe abandoned that. I think later in life he expressed an interest to go to Palestine and was interested in Zionism. Uh, just because you have an interest to go to Palestine and Zionism doesn't necessarily have a religious commitment.
Hmm.
I think where Kierkegaard and Kafka may have some crossover is the religious like experience of writing, but a more direct parallel can be drawn between the two. And this was just brought to my attention doing some research is that a, a big feature in Kierkegaard's writing is the paradox that takes place in Fear and Trembling with Father Abraham. And the paradox that goes on there is the teleological suspension of the ethical, where Abraham is called by God to sacrifice Isaac, but murdering Isaac is wrong on an ethical level. But there's this higher religious calling where he has to do it. And he agonizes over the tension that Abraham has to endure and what Abraham has to do in order to become a knight of faith and be prepared to sacrifice the thing that is the most dear thing to him in the world and therefore renounce the world in and of itself. Kafka, too, in his notebooks, I haven't tracked. I think it's the Blue Octavo notebook. I think it's in that one. It might be in diaries. I'm probably going to have to order both. He too takes up Abraham, showing that he had read Kierkegaard. And from what I understand, the Abrahams that Kafka discusses are not the Abraham, the knight of faith Abraham that is in Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. Rather, there are more worldly Abrahams. Now, what the implications of all this really means, I don't know. I haven't read it, but there is this decisive point of contact between the two authors.
No, that's great. I didn't know about that connection. Do we know if those notebooks ever became a piece or like a parable or a
They're
short story?
they're 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 two separate books that you can get. One is called Diaries, and I believe one's called the Blue Octavo. I think they're
Okay,
both like 10 and $15 on Amazon, respectively. And
gotcha.
from what I understand, the I have not looked at them, so I'm just going off of stuff that I was able to research. I have not laid eyes on them. The musings on the different types of Abrahams, I believe, are spread out in parable form
Okay,
throughout the Blue Octavo notebooks. If I resurrecting that memory
okay.
correctly. What's
No, that.
interesting about all this is that we have a personal connection to um, this piece. Our good friend Troy Smith. Actually, I was searching for answers to this. Our good friend Troy Smith, who I'll be doing a breakdown of Blake's The Tiger with, and Troy is like one of the most brilliant dudes I know. Um, Incredible researcher. He'll probably be famous one day or whatever. He deserves all the attention that he gets, but he is a incredible Kierkegaard and Danish scholar. And he actually, like 6 years ago, he wrote a paper that was perfect. Did you get a chance to look at it, CJ?
No, I did. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm just ashamed that I didn't cite it directly, but I guarantee that any connections here I'm able to make are I am indebted to Troy.
Yeah. So Troy, well, I don't. It's just a fantastic paper. I don't know if he will be releasing it in book form one day, but he goes to greater length showing just how much crossover there is between um, Kafka, Borges, and Kierkegaard. It's very thorough with it. He did a very exhaustive search for it and introduces these concepts of the different Abrahams better. So Troy will be on with me next week. So maybe I'll pick his brain a little bit more about that. But it was a worthwhile thing.
Yeah, perfect. Do you want to maybe go into the two stories that Borges mentions as Kafka-esque? If we maybe can't do justice more to the Abraham connection with Kafka and Kierkegaard, maybe we can try to understand why Borges chose these two.
Well, what do you think? I mean, you've read Kierkegaard, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. I definitely see it here with these two stories. I think if I maybe want to start with it's odd. I want to start with the North Pole one, but
Oh, you want to start with that one? I got a lot to say about that, but not so much with
we
Kierkegaard.
no, that's but I think that one is interesting because we sort of have Kierkegaard with a biting irony. At least that's how I interpret this, where at first these preachers are saying that yes, the North Pole is this trip that is so beneficial to your spirit. It will make you a much better Christian if you go. And then they just turn the corner and they admit how difficult and almost impossible, dare I say, Kafka-esque it is to even get to the North Pole at that time, let alone this time. It's a very perilous journey. It's constantly shifting. Um, that they just said, "Oh, you know what? Any trip you take is like going to the North Pole. So you're saved regardless, right? It's like walk out your front door, go get your mail, you're saved. Eternal well-being is upon you." And that just strikes me as Kierkegaard's humor that we can also see in Kafka as well, because Kafka can be funny when he wants to. I think we just see the depressing nausea of some of Kafka's stories and parables, but I think sometimes we have to laugh at how ridiculous these situations are that characters find themselves in. And I think here it's an example of that ridiculousness. And if we want to again go back to each of the following examples, we have the North Pole, which is this perilous place. It, at least from our science, it's shifting. It's hard to define. It's hard to get there. Just in general, it doesn't matter. Back in the 19th century, 20th century, 21st century,
But CJ,
it's hard place to get to.
we can explore so many perilous places. Why is the North Pole a problem?
Well, I think there's just something about it that's dangerous and too dangerous for people to get to in this scenario where maybe the conditions are too much and they just said that we can't do it. So any trip is fine for you. So I think that connection. I'm going on too long. That connection between Kafka and Kierkegaard, I see in Kierkegaard's irony of just, well, if the trip is impossible, then we might as well just say, hey, any trip you make is a worthwhile trip, which almost just shows, I think, something that he's always kind of knocked Christians for is taking the easy route, is kind of saying, oh yeah, anybody, any act of faith is good enough, and Kierkegaard saying like, no, that's not right. You have to go to the North Pole. You have to make perilous journeys. If you just cheapen it, then it's not worthwhile. So
You're just watering down the wine, man.
right,
Just watering.
exactly. So I think Kierkegaard showing this watering down of the wine, if you will, with the ministers going back on the North Pole journey, is almost like them going back on like, yeah, Achilles, go overtake that tortoise, and we can't overtake the tortoise, so the maybe the preachers say, it's okay, Achilles, you're a winner to us, even though you can't, you get a participation trophy. Like, even though you can't overtake the tortoise, like, you won, it's okay. But there's still this, like, illogical kind of thing of, like, wait, what? Like, why can't I overtake the tortoise? And maybe there's something there with the North Pole. I'm not sure, but
Yeah. All right.
that's my
Look,
reading. That's my reading
okay.
of it.
Look, and CJ's not wrong. Everything that CJ said is correct. Okay. But that is a particular level of understanding. Okay. There's hints and nudges here. All right. So why would people think that the North Pole is good for the eternal well being of the soul? Well, this requires a historical understanding and a look at some cartography. All right. If you look at ancient flat earth maps and things like that, you have, something named Mount Meru at the center of the earth that is, in some instances, interchangeable with Shangri-La or Garden of Eden or something of this nature. Okay. And the more primitive people used to posit that this is where a lot of the magnetic phenomena were emanating from. But of course, as enlightened people, we don't believe such fantasies. The other issue CJ alluded to the nebulous nature of the North Pole, that it's shifting. What many people don't understand is that there are actually count them, four North Poles. Okay. There is a North Pole, Alaska. You have I've got to look them all up here. I've got them. Let me see here.
No worries.
So the terrestrial North Pole is a fixed geographic point that's diametrically opposed to the terrestrial South Pole on our planet's axis of rotation. Okay. So you've got terrestrial North Pole. That's one. Then there's the North Dip Pole. The North Dip Pole is a spot where the geomagnetic field is perpendicular to the Earth's surface, dipping to meet the big rotating ellipsoid that is our planet. Mm-hmm. And that's not stationary. It is migrated from Canada to in the Arctic Ocean. It keeps moving. And your compass is actually being directed towards that North Dip Pole that they say. Then there's the third one. There's the geomagnetic North Pole. It's a different thing altogether. And this is calculated with math models. And it runs through the geomagnetic center of the Earth. And then there, like I was saying earlier, there's an actual place called North Pole, Alaska.
Gotcha.
So
Do we know when these were discovered, or at least just figure it out? I'm curious if
it's very complicated, because the thing is about the North Pole is that if you start digging in, what you find is a lot of the claims of the charting of the North Pole are contested. Okay. So you have all these Arctic explorers that started going up into the North Pole before they started exploring Antarctica in the 20s or even the early 20th century, in like 1908, 1909. A lot of those are disputed.
Yeah. Let's get Kafka and Kafka's time, at least, maybe, when he was probably younger.
The first claimed flight over the pole, okay, whichever one that's talking about, was a guy who you used to live in the hometown of, a guy that everyone should know for so many reasons. A man named Richard E. Byrd from Winchester, Virginia, claimed to fly over the North Pole on May 9th, 1926. The diary is contested. And someone that everyone should know, another man who would then make a name for himself, Roald Amundsen, also has the claim of flying over the North Pole on May 12th, 1926.
Gotcha. So what you're saying though is that, there's still a lot of, uncertainty about where the North Pole is, or just saying like, hey, like, we can't necessarily point at a map and say with definitive doubt, like, this is where the North Pole is, that we're still trying to figure it out, and we're still trying to understand better what the North Pole is. So it almost sounds Kafka-esque in a way to say, hey, like, go to the North Pole. It's like, well, which one? And
which one?
Do I have to go to like the center of the Earth to figure that out? Like, if you're talking about like magnets and all that stuff, I'm just curious. It's interesting.
Yeah, there's going to be some. All right, so like you can arrive at like the Alaskan North Pole. You can
Mm,
arrive at the stationary ones, but then you've got these
sure.
other two that are constantly migrating.
Oh, okay,
And
gotcha.
and interestingly enough, the Russians actually planted a flag at the bottom of the ocean for one of these
Hmm.
poles. So while we
Gotcha.
while we planted a flag on the moon, the
Right.
Russians took a sub to the bottom to plant their flag. I find that to be very interesting.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. This almost sounds Kafka-esque. If we're talking about our examples before, it sounds as if we're dealing with something that is out of grasp. It's hard to define that. If talking about the poles that are moving, that it's sort of always out of reach, just as the tortoise is always out of reach of Achilles, just as
The
the
unicorn is always out of
unicorn
reach.
is out of reach. Yeah, so we're kind of dealing with those things there. So that's just want
I
to
find that
connect it all back to
aren't narwhals at the North Pole? Is
I
that right?
I have no.
Nar
I'm not going to make that assertion. I have no
narwhals.
idea.
So what's interesting about this is the creature, the narwhal. Uh, yeah, they live in Arctic waters of Canada, Greenland, Norway, and Russia. We have an interesting convergence here, where the North Pole
Hmm.
is this undefinable thing that we can't get to. And it is believed that these unicorn horns that were passed around in medieval Europe actually came from narwhals that are coincidentally
Oh,
also living at the North Pole. And I've said this many times.
interesting. I didn't know that.
It's way easier for me to believe that you could have a horse with a horn on its head than these things. I don't
The
know if you guys have ever seen
narwhal.
or not. Narwhals are they they're like a seal with a unicorn's horn. It's like it's totally weird.
Yeah, they are weird creatures for sure. It is yeah. It's hard to define. Again, Kafkaesque in that
Yeah,
sense, maybe in what Borges is trying to outline. Okay, so I
but
think we
apparently.
have a good sense of the North Pole one. What did you think about the counterfeiter one? That one I had a hard time trying to figure out, but I was trying to understand.
Well, I think with that one, obviously you have some sort of a paradox.
Mm,
You have employed a criminal
mm.
in order to do honest work for the Bank of England.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
That makes sense now.
so
Okay.
so you have, in some sense, you have the. I think we're dealing with a different type of contradiction, not a one of the Zenoian dichotomy of having the distance and never being able to get to the thing, or overcoming the tortoise
Hmm.
in the Achilles paradox. But what we have here is we have this tension between uh, 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 types of the type of person that ought to be employed by an institution that is in charge of safeguarding everyone's money. So
Gotcha.
we conceptually we have two things that seem to be separated by an abyss, a different type of infinity.
Mm.
What we would call that type of infinity, I'm not exactly sure, but I think this is speaking when we're talking about Kafkaesque. I think this is like the illogical nature of it,
Right. You
and
can
it's
almost imagine that being a short story from Kafka. It's like, okay, this counterfeiter is trying to it has to do this bank work and he has to not do the thing that he's used to. Yeah, I can imagine it being the short story for sure.
right. And and I think again, it's interesting. I pulled a muscle before we did this broadcast, so I'm like, I've got a little bit of nausea, and so I'm like, maybe I'm a little bit more sensitive to the paradoxes than usual. But like, yeah, it's nauseating to think that a common criminal, a counterfeiter, could actually be entrusted with such tremendous responsibility, right? Like
Right.
people that do good, honest work or banking with the Bank of England, and they've actually employed criminals to be some sort of safeguard
Hmm.
rather than an individual who has never committed any sort of crime that would be perfectly fit for that position. So you have this nausea of like, man, the system's totally rigged. Like
Yes.
you've got a criminal getting further ahead than me, and I do the right thing. Like
Yeah.
so you have this tension between carnal aesthetic life and ethical life, and they're not matching up. It's unfair. It makes
Mm,
you shake your fist at the world. It makes you sick in some way.
yeah, I think that's a great. I have nothing to add, only to say that I think this is the first example, and maybe the only example that Borges uses that kind of hits on the Kafka-esque bureaucracy, right? Like just like what you're hitting on of just like the illogical nature of how these systems work, and you're just wondering like, how do I advance? Like you're saying, if this counterfeiter is in this position, and I don't counterfeit, I'm a law-abiding citizen. How does this system work even to begin with? It's out of grasp. So
Yeah.
perfect.
Well, can we move on to the fourth
We
paragraph?
can most definitely. Do you want
Okay.
to read it?
Yeah, sure. The fourth of these prefigurations I have found is Browning's poem Fears and Scruples, published in 1876. A man has, or believe he has, a famous friend. He has never seen this friend, and the fact is that the friend has so far never helped him, although tales are told of his most noble traits and authentic letters of his circulate about. Then someone places these traits in doubt, and the handwriting experts declare that the letters are apocryphal. The man asks in the last line, and if this friend were God? So I actually the Browning poem is interesting. And I'm thankful for Borges's interpretation of it because it made it a lot more clear
Definitely.
what Browning was actually trying to say. And I believe I uploaded my recitation of it. It's not perfect to the YouTube channel. You can check it out. But Browning is becoming a more and more interesting figure for me, and I have a feeling he is a major player on the world stage. Uh, I don't know what to say about this. I mean, I think Borges sums it up kind of well.
Yeah,
You know,
I think it is. I think it is something that is, we never want to say that it's self-explanatory because that's not what we do on the podcast. We try to explain things, but I think looking at it with the context that we have, like if you're reading this essay and you're kind of getting all of these different precursors in your head and you're kind of getting an idea of what's going on, with what Borges is alluding to, I think this makes sense. I don't know about you, Luke.
I think it causes cognitive dissonance, right? Because
Yeah,
if okay, like for instance, if and CJ does this often to me, where I'm like, he's a great interlocutor because he trips me up. But if CJ was like, "Oh, what should I do about this person?" You know, da 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 da. They make all these promises and like da 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 da, and I'd be like, you know what, CJ? I don't think this person exists, and I don't think
right.
they're going to deliver. I don't think they are who you think they are. Da 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 da. And then you go, but Luke, you believe in the Bible and God, and you cling to that, and aren't they analogous in some way? And I go, and then I have that like mental
Right.
concept clash, that nausea, and ultimately, I mean, even though I've got a little bit of nausea right now as a result of a pulled oblique, um, I will say that, I mean, they're not analogous, okay? Like, have I seen the face of God? Have I experienced it? A well, I don't know. I'll take that back. Have I?
Another podcast.
Well,
You can explain it.
all I'm trying to say here is the relationship with God and the relationship between this individual and the Browning poem are very different. Okay, if you have the right eyes, you can just you can perceive the theophanies of God all around you. Okay. So we have more evidence for the existence of God if you are attuned to it. Now people may say, "Oh, what you're projecting, you're reading this into nature. You're reading this into your experiences." And you know what? That might be the case. There might be this ultimate gestalt switch in reality where we're all presented with the same evidence and we have to choose which route we're going to go.
So,
Is
what
this
is Browning then trying to get at then, or what is the Kafka-esque then for this? Is it that there's this person that, again, we're talking
I
about
think
this gulf. We always talk about. It seems like we've been alluding to this gulf between either getting to a place or trying to understand something, what something is, and it almost sounds like what we have here, quite just simply to say, is Browning or the the author or whoever the person is in the poem, trying to talk to this person and
I
yet
think
we
I
never
think
really know the
Browning
identity or if this person is real or not. And
I think Browning's just trying to introduce a new logical contradiction.
mm,
Okay. So I think we have to ask ourselves. I mean, this whole essay is filled with different types of logical contradiction. They need their own names,
mhm,
right? In this particular type of logical contradiction, we've got double standards. It seems is what Browning is pointing out. We've got ones if if a human being were doing what he's claiming God does,
mhm,
we wouldn't tolerate it. But because it's God, we do tolerate it. So
mhm,
we've got two sets of rules for two different types of entities.
mhm.
And I don't know exactly what kind of name you would give that outside of it being a double standard. Maybe this is the double standard paradox.
Or maybe it's just another layer of Kafka-esque. I don't
Right.
know. Yeah,
You know, I mean, at least what we should be seeing here is there's not just one type of contradiction. There are many.
sure. No,
And I think if there are future commentators on this, maybe I'll write about it. I'm not sure how much I want to devote to logic hashing out here, but it it seems like there. I mean, we've still got two paragraphs left, and I think we've probably talked about 12 different types of paradoxes,
no,
and
for
we're doing
sure.
that in an improvisational sense. If I was to go through this entire thing, I could probably wring out like 30 of them.
No, for sure. And I think maybe that's part of what Borges is trying to highlight is that even trying to understand what Kafkaesque is, and all the paradoxes it contains, is perhaps in and of itself a Kafkaesque enterprise. But we shall.
You end up in this situation where you try to enumerate all the different paradoxes, and you find that it's unending, and you can't ever settle it because there's just more and more and more.
Exactly. But we shall venture forth and go to the next paragraph, and,
Sure.
and I will be happy to read it. Again, I'm going to butcher some French that is in here, so forgive me, but I will continue through. Maybe I'll just use the translation um, of the name. My notes also register two stories. One is from Leon Bloy's Disagreeable Tales, that is the English translation, and relates the case of some people who possess all manner of globes, atlases, railroad guides, and trunks, but who die without ever having managed to leave their hometown. The other is entitled Carcassonne, and is the work of Lord Dunsany. An invincible army of warriors leaves an infinite castle, conquers kingdoms and sees monsters, and exhausts the deserts and the mountains. But they never reach Carcassonne, though once they glimpse it from afar. The story is, as one can easily see, the strict reverse of the previous one. In the first, the city is never left. In the second, it is never reached.
Yeah, I mean it's just, I think it's kind of self-explanatory. I mean, I
Yes.
th- I think that Borges pretty much tells you about what's going on here. Do you think there's more?
I think these both are self-explanatory, but I also think it is interesting how he we are going chronological, but it's also just how disparate. I think maybe we are as we're accumulating these stories uh, and these examples. I think we're just seeing the just where we've come from is sort of mind-boggling that we've started with the beginning of philosophy, right? We're talking about Zeno, and then we've gone now to the 20th century, talking about Leon Bloy, and then, or I should say, 19th century, 20th century, with Leon Bloy, and then we're getting into Lord Dunsany as well. Um, it's just mind-boggling, who are both, I should say, 20th century writers, 19th century, 20th century, but it's just mind-boggling how we've kind of come this far, and it's just like, wow, like we have a lot of precursors here. There's this thread that Borges is making of what is considered he considers Kafkaesque. So, but like you said, I think it is self-explanatory now, at least what we see here as being Kafkaesque in both Leon Bloy's case and the case of Lord Dunsany.
I will point out one thing that I think is hidden
Go
to
ahead.
the individuals who perhaps have a higher understanding of what's going on here.
Or just
And
what's going on?
well,
What
I'll
did you
just,
find?
I mean, look, Borges is saying, Borges is saying, hey, the North Pole is unreachable, but he's also two paragraphs down. He's he's we've got these globes, these atlases, these railroad guides,
Mm-hmm.
and trunks. How do we have all these cartography projections
Mm-hmm.
and we still can't find the place?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you'll figure it out. Let's move to the next one.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it maybe shows that cartography. It's hard to say. I mean, I don't want to. I mean, he does have a story about, or I should
Yeah,
say,
the
a little
exactitude of
miniature. Yeah, the exactitude, yeah, of science, which kind of talks about cartographers as well. So it's something
well,
I
and
think he would be interested in.
yeah, and we'll do that at some point. So this is an obvious tie-in to what CJ said, the exactitude of science. There are two other authors who address this subject, okay, at least that I know of, and that need to be handled seriously. Baudrillard talks about this in Simulacra and Simulation, okay, and Umberto Eco on the impossibility of making a map.
And who knows?
So
Maybe they are also Kafka's maybe not precursors, but his progeny. Maybe
we
you
have
could
to think
say.
about this. How is it possible that we can't have one map? Why is there not one map?
Hmm.
Just think about that.
Hmm.
Shouldn't there be one map? And there isn't. You've got you've got Peter's projections and you've got Mercator projections. You got this projection, and none of them are matching external reality. Why?
Hmm.
Why?
Well,
I don't. That's for you to figure out, not for me to
yeah,
tell you.
science is a complicated thing.
Yeah, it's complicated. All right.
I know it
Okay.
is. But yeah, let's end the essay with the final paragraph, which is just, I mean, goodness, you could go on. We could go on for hours on this final paragraph, but maybe we can at least give a good kind of explanation of it if you want to take us home, Luke, with that
Sure,
final
sure.
paragraph.
If I am not mistaken, the heterogeneous pieces I have enumerated resemble Kafka. If I am not mistaken, not all of them resemble each other. This second fact is the more significant. In each of these texts, we find Kafka's idiosyncrasy to a greater or lesser degree. But if Kafka had never written a line, we would not perceive this quality. In other words, it would not exist. The poem Fears and Scruples by Browning foretells Kafka's work. But our reading of Kafka perceptibly sharpens and deflects our reading of the poem. Browning did not read it as we do now. In the critic's vocabulary, the word precursor is indispensable, but it should be cleansed of all connotation of polemics or rivalry. The fact is that every writer creates his own precursors. His work modifies our conception of the past as it will modify the future. And then we have a little footnote. It says C.T.S. Eliot's Points of View, 1941, pages 25 to 26. In this correlation, the identity or plurality of the men involved is unimportant. The early Kafka of Betrachtung is less a precursor of the Kafka of somber myths and atrocious institutions than is Browning or Lord Dunsany. There's so much to say here.
Oh my
We've
goodness.
we've probably been going like an hour and a half. So I'll let you just unload everything you want to say about this.
Well, I think the first question, I want to make it more of a dialogue here than an unloading. Why do you think Borges says, like he's given us, it's sort of this weird way to end where he says, like, look, I've given you this list of these influences, Kafka's precursors, but you know what? Not all of them are alike, and not all of them resemble each other. It almost makes you think that he's saying that this chain I've made, I don't know if there's actually a chain here. Why would he say that not all of them resemble each other?
Well, because I think he's saying that Kafka and himself change our perception of them, and we only really see that they resemble one another after Kafka
Mm,
and himself come into existence. Now,
Gotcha.
I think it's presumptuous to say that Browning didn't understand what he was doing when he wrote Fears and Scruples. Um, I don't.
No,
I mean,
well,
I'm not some sort of Browning apologist. I don't really know, but I think Browning's a very intelligent man and probably knew what he was doing, and
yeah,
probably
there was
was just as familiar, if not more so, with the traditions that Kafka is drawing on. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know my Browning, but
no, I don't know either, but the little research I've done, I recall there being a fragment of a letter where Browning explains that this poem is a, analogy to faith and to believing in God, and I think that is, enough to say that you would understand what he's, writing as a poet. But I wonder if it's something where it's saying that again that Browning might foretell Kafka's work, but Browning did not read Kafka because Browning didn't read Kafka. I don't think if let us check the timelines here. I believe
I don't think Browning could have read Kafka.
exactly like on a timeline wise, he couldn't have read Kafka. So I
But
think that's where
he could have read Kierkegaard, and he could have read Zeno.
right, which is another good point here, where it's like okay,
I
but
think
what
so. Let me
if
look at
we're
Browning's birthday.
yeah, because if we're dealing, this is, a question of influence and of how ideas go through time, right? Is that, well, then why couldn't of Browning come to the same conclusion? And I think the most important thing to realize too is that without knowing what Kafka read, I don't think he's read all of these stories, right? It's sort of some of it is maybe impossible due to accessibility, but it's impossible for Kafka, or at least where we have good understanding that Kafka did not read all he. If we said, "Oh, did you read Han Yun?" That I don't think he said, "Well, who's Han Yun? I want to read more about him." That he might not have read all of these influences that Borges lines out, but Borges has read all of these, and he is the one to make the connection. So perhaps maybe he's saying here that well, Browning did not read it as we do now because Browning didn't have me, as in Borges's encyclopedic bibliographical knowledge of going back to Greek philosophy and then to Chinese traditions and then bringing it back to modernist works and things like that. It just strikes me as something where Borges is this connecting fiber of all of these, including Kafka himself. That I think, like he says, that like, hey, the early Kafka is less of a precursor of Kafka than Browning or Lord Dunsany, and I that's another interesting part too, where maybe it is Borges who makes that connection, and that's the most important part. Not so much that, yeah, it's wild to me. I'm still trying to understand it. I don't know if you have anything to respond to that.
Well, I was just doing a little calendar research here. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Browning lived to the 12th of December, 1889,
Mm-hmm.
and he published Fears and Scruples in 1876.
Okay.
Uh, I I don't believe Kierkegaard was available for him in English translation during his
Gotcha.
lifetime. I don't think Kierkegaard really got translated to English until um, the 20th century. So
Okay.
it's probably true that I mean, unless you read it in Danish,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably true that he did not have access to Kierkegaard. But
Fair
I don't.
enough.
But maybe he did. I don't know what. I know Browning wrote in English. I'm not sure how many languages he mastered back then. Probably not Danish. Probably
Gotcha.
not. He probably I would imagine he had a working knowledge of Latin and Greek because that was kind of like the standard. Maybe even some French.
Yeah. But
But
this is interesting though because you're bringing another layer to the story or to this essay, I should say, because you're almost saying, well, could have any of these other, precursors have done the same thing or have, had these influences, and would be we be calling these, Kafka-esque? And the answer would
Well,
probably be no, because we need Kafka. But even if we had Kafka, I don't even know if we'd be calling them Kafka-esque, because we then need Borges to tell us that these are Kafka-esque to begin with.
well,
It's
if Kafka had never existed, we may have been calling them Browningian, or if Browning had never existed, we may be calling them Zenoian. We probably would be calling them Zenoian rather than Kafka-esque. Um,
mm,
I think this raises a more interesting question. I mean, because Kafka can't be the first person to ever like feel the nausea of paradox. Like, obviously, this was probably unsettling to the philosopher that walked out on Zeno. He probably felt some sort of torment inside contemplating the tortoise and Achilles. Um, what is more interesting here, the line that really struck me
mm,
was he was saying uh, that like the early Kafka bears less in common with
right.
him than his ancestors. Where's the line?
Yeah, the early Kafka of Bertolt Tung, which we should preface, is a collection of his early short stories before he wrote his more well-known ones, is less a precursor of the Kafka of somber myths and atrocious institutions than is Browning or Lord Dunsany.
Okay,
So,
so on the surface, this is totally absurd, right? Like
right,
that
again,
that would be
Kafkaesque.
like that would be like saying, right? That would be like saying that 20-year-old Luke is not in the same sequence of time, that person is dead and gone and has no real impact on the 41-year-old version of myself that is currently existing. And in fact, Borges, I have tapped into some sort of pre-existing script, right? Borges talks about this in other places where like he is all of man and mankind is in him and he's becoming one with like the language of the universe. And so these greats have these like phenomenal insights and they're all sort of tapping in to this other metaphysical time, not the time sequence, the slices that make up CJ or Luke, but the greats are apprehending this. I don't know this. Some call it the Akashic record, right? This this metaphysical language, right? And they're just kind of writing down, transcribing, translating, like prophets did in the Old Testament or like the Book of Mormon or something like that. Except they're doing it in a secular way. So there's more in common with these people of genuine insight than earlier temporal slices of myself.
Mm.
Am I articulating this correctly? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think actually it keys right into the footnote that Borges puts in with T.S. Eliot's points of view. 1941 pages 25 through 26. Took a little digging to find out that this points of view was actually a collection of essays or literary criticism from T.S. Eliot, who we know as a poet. But he wrote this essay called Tradition and Individual Talent in, I believe, 1919. So it's a republish of the essay. And he almost talks about this same idea
Is it
that
1919 or
Borges.
1921? Because
Oh, it might be 21. You got it. Yeah, I'm 2 years
21 in
behind.
the Bartleby edition. It's 21.
You got it. Yeah, I'm 2 years behind. I'm always 2 years behind, it seems, with things. But it looks like here Elliot is getting at what you're saying here, where he refers to this thing that I'll quote him here, where he says, quoting Eliot, I should say, from this essay, where he says, "No poet, no artist of any art has his complete meaning alone. His significance, his appreciation, is the appreciation of his relation to the dead poets and artists. The existing monuments of art form an ideal order among themselves, which is modified by the introduction of the new work of art among them. The existing order is complete before the new work arrives. For order to persist after the supervention of novelty, the whole existing order must be, if ever so slightly, altered. The past is altered by the present as much as the present is directly or directed by the past," which is like that final sentence that Borges takes and uses, in that when he where he just says, "Yeah, the fact is that every writer creates his own precursors His work modifies our conception of the past as it will modify the future, is exactly what Eliot says in this essay. And then an interesting part of that essay is that he's attacking the when I say modernism, I'm talking about early 20th century. We're talking a world that is devastated by World War One. We're just going into a new world now. It's an attack on the romantic, capital R, romantic view of the self, of the individual. We have people like William Wordsworth who are saying that poetry should come from the individual, that the individual is the most important part of poetry itself. And here we have Eliot saying, well, actually, no, it's this tradition, this superstructure above literature that is
Right.
happening, and that, like you're saying, Luke, your past self doesn't matter. Like what Eliot mentions later in the essay is he says a good poet should actually absolve his personality away from the work. That the more as he becomes a better poet, the more his personality wilts away into the backdrop. That he is now just part of the superstructure and is having a conversation with poets and with art itself. So it's this interesting thing where I think that might be the well that Borges is drinking from, and allows him to just throw off this phrase of like, yeah, Kafka's not any different than Lord Dunsany, or I'm sorry, he's less of an influence than Lord Dunsany and Browning, because maybe in that Eliot view, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Luke, to me it seems like what Kafka is now is that he's in that conversation with Browning, Lord Dunsany, the unicorn of Anyun, Zeno. He's not in conversation with his old self anymore. He's getting on this superstructure of art that Eliot is talking about, that Borges is talking about.
Yeah. I I get it. I I get it. So
Yeah.
what this is a raises an interesting question. All right. So
Yeah.
like I'm very pattern oriented.
Hmm.
So a lot of what I'm writing right now is detecting repeatable patterns. And like you
Okay.
can see it over and over again. Borges is obviously aware of these repeatable patterns.
Hmm.
And the question is where's this repeatable pattern coming from? Is this some sort of like Hegelian world spirit that is being channeled through intellectuals?
Yeah. Could you
Uh,
explain that? So when you say Hegelian word spirit, do you mean that like
well,
Hegel? I mean, I know that's like a can of worms, but what
I,
if I understand what you're saying that there's just this underlying uh, world, or this underlying spirit that everything is emanating from. That's what you're saying. Like you're like, what is the source of all of these?
I am not qualified to say what Hegel really meant. I mean, I'd have to go back and I'd have to really brush up on the phenomenology of spirit.
Sure, but
But
what is the spirit then of your what you're
essentially,
saying?
the idea is that like individuals are husks for this larger
Mm,
thing that is manifesting through the world, right?
gotcha.
And I think,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm hazy on the details with Hegel, but I think it ultimately culminates in like reality contemplating its source. So like,
gotcha.
but don't quote me on that. It's been like years since I've read Hegel,
No,
so
I just want to make sure that like we're not just throwing out terms people wouldn't understand, or at least like
it
just
becomes
giving
a
more context. Yeah,
it becomes a type of I don't know. It becomes like a type of panentheism, I think,
gotcha.
which would. But I'm really I'm talking about things I shouldn't be talking about because
No, that's okay. Well,
I'm
let's
over. I'm. It's not doing Hegel justice. But
No, that's fine. But let's maybe talk about what we can talk about, which I think is Kafka and Borges. I want to touch on what you're saying because I think it's super. It just gets right to the point of this essay, I think, too, which is the Kafka-esque burden that Borges has put upon himself to say, well, I take this idea from Rex Butler and his essay, rereading Kafka and his precursors. He has a really great analysis that you can find on JSTOR. I forget the journal it's from. I think it's from a Borges journal that's actually pretty popular. What he talks about is that there's this, we are listing out these precursors, and they all shape up to this, understanding of who Kafka is, right? We're kind of getting Kafka and his precursors. But then what Rex Butler talks about is that there is this another Kafka that we're dealing with, and that is a Kafka that both Kafka and his precursors have in common. And I think that is perhaps what Borges is trying to get at, is that that to him, that Kafka, that I'll put air quotes Kafka, that oversees, that is kind of the umbrella of Kafka and his precursors, is that world spirit that you're talking about, perhaps, is that underlying force. It's like, I want to get to what Kafka means. And Borges is like, I'm going to try to do that with these precursors. And that he is that is a Kafka-esque,
It's another Zenoian paradox.
right?
Trying to
Because then,
define what Kafka is.
because now we need to have somebody that has Borges as his precursor, because he is, and then a precursor to Borges is Kafka, whose precursor is Lord Dunsany, whose precursor is, ad infinitum, right? We're kind of going down this rabbit hole of influences, and it just can't stop, because once somebody, it's just never ending. Like you said, it's just the nausea of trying to say, like, let's put a finger on the pulse of what Kafka is impossible. It's nauseating, like you were saying earlier.
I'm remarkably okay with that. You know,
Hmm. Why remarkably? As in, like, you're okay with not knowing the true Kafka, or that this chain will go on forever of trying to understand.
my life doesn't depend on pigeonholing Kafka. Um,
mm,
I guess I'm like the philosopher that walked out on Zeno. You know,
yeah, no, exactly. I think that is completely understandable. I think that's something that maybe a lot of people do when encountered with these sort of literary exercises, if you will, right? Where we're talking about kind of like analyzing influences, and, oh, the anxiety of influence and this and that. Not to discredit them, these exercises, but I feel like some people feel like it's again, so what? Or, okay, well, that's great. I will do this and that, and go about my day. But I think there's just something here, though, that is maybe important, which is what you talked about, which is that we're trying to get at this underlying, like, we're just trying to go that extra step deeper to understand what, um, not only this author is, but, like, what are these paradoxes? What is this feeling of reality that Kafka dealt with, that Borges wants to explore more of, that he can see in literature now that he has Kafka? That Kafka is actually important for Borges in that sense, is that he can catch these threads of the world, of philosophy, of mythology, because of Kafka. That it's not so much Kafka that's doing it, is that Borges is reading into it and then reading into these others, that Kafka is sort of a lens through which Borges can seize uh, these influences, and now Borges is a lens for us to see Kafka, for Kafka to see through all these other. It
well,
gets it gets a little crazy. Yeah.
so all right, look. So ultimately, what you're left with here, all right, okay. So the reason why I'm not going to lose any sleep about what Kafka-esque is, or what Browning really intended, or the Zenoian paradoxes, or anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
is that what I'm particularly interested in is not those things. What I'm interested in is how these are portals to the superstructure behind them that's animating them. Now that keeps me up at night. Okay.
Wow. Hmm.
And,
That
and
might
so
actually be Kafka-esque too. I don't know. It's
it
like,
may, I may end up, what's interesting is that I may end up turning myself into a character that they can be later essayed about by a Borges, the sequel,
uh,
or Kafka, the sequel, the man who sought the superstructure behind all literature and
yeah,
cinema and da 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 da. And in that process, he went deaf and blind and turned down the love of his life essentially recreated some twist on Faust
Mhm.
I may end up becoming some parody, but
Mhm.
you know, I also believe in God and the Bible, and if God wants me to understand it, He'll show it to me. So I got backup. I got backup.
Mhm. Gotcha.
I'm not
So
doing
that.
it on my own,
Yeah. No. So
and it's
then you
okay.
don't. You.
It's okay, and it's okay if I don't figure it out because God will show
Mm,
it to me when I die.
mm. But then to go back to it, it sounds like though you would you say though that this exercise that Borges is doing is perhaps him trying to do that?
No,
Because,
because
because
he's just
no.
no, because he's just showing you. He's just showing you that he he's not giving you an answer. He's just saying, "Hey, look,
Hmm.
look," you know. Um,
Hmm.
but maybe there is an implied answer in there. You know, maybe there's an implied answer in there. I see him presenting the problem. I don't see him presenting the solution. I see him like, "Hey, look at all these weird things."
Hmm.
Uh, shrugs, shoulder shrug on to next essay. But maybe if I
Hmm.
knew more about Borges, if I knew the totality of his work, maybe I could see that he does provide the answer somewhere.
Yeah.
Um,
What's
but
interesting is
I'm not a Borgesian scholar.
I am not either, but I will use a Borgesian scholar in Rex Butler to maybe explain that this structure apparently was in a collection of maybe some of his literary works called Other Inquisitions. That connection or that apparently that piece of work is lost, and I think it was put into another work. But what we have now is
It was
this.
lost, but then it was
It was
found, and but
found,
we don't.
but
But
now
it's locked in a safe somewhere.
right, yeah,
I'm
it's the
sensing
Disney.
something.
Yeah, it's the Disney vault. It's all in the Disney vault. But anyways, so we have this piece in this book called Other Inquisitions. We have Kafka and his Precursors, and then this is followed by Avatars of the Tortoise, which is 1939 essay, which is just the same effort that he's doing, where he's kind of tracing, this perpetual race of Achilles and the tortoise through time. So it just seems like Borges is just trying to. It just seems like this is a pattern that Borges is trying to find patterns, and I can't help but think that that might be something that he's trying to do um, in the end, or that is part of his literary
Look,
journey so much.
the goal might be just to teach everyone else how to do pattern recognition. You know, maybe that's maybe that's the unspoken gift that Borges gives to us. It's like, see, this
Hmm.
thing is like this thing. And
Yeah, maybe.
it's like training up the mind so you can go and start to figure this out for yourself, that there is this web of interconnectivity going on. Now,
Mm,
what the source of this interconnectivity is and how it connects, that's going to be up to the individual with the sharpened skills to be able to tie these alchemical threads together. But I think I have some. I think I have found some of them. Um, but you're gonna have to buy my book one day.
well, yeah, I'll end though with this. Borges, at least to me, when I've heard or read his interviews, he sort of has this opinion of his writing that you would maybe call I don't know, just self-flagellation, or just he's just very
He's
humble
deprecating.
he's
Yeah,
deprecating, exactly. He's just a critic of his own work, this and that. Part of me almost feels like perhaps Borges doesn't look at himself so much as a writer, but as a reader, as a voracious reader. And that's almost something I think of Borges as more, more so than his works, is just how much this man has read and how much he is committed to memory, and how much that he can make connections to things that you would not really think about and not really realize are connected. And I think this essay is in the spirit of that. Is that this is Borges the reader showing you kind of, hey, look, let's look into my library, and this is what I can tell is connected to Borges. I'm sorry, to connected to Kafka, and it is almost just an exploration into Borges the reader, I think. But that's how.
definitely. I mean, it shows that he knows his stuff. I'm trying to think this encyclopedic like mind that is on display and everything that we've looked at with Borges.
Hmm.
Um, I've seen it before, and
Hmm.
I mean, I'm not. I have a PhD in philosophy, not literature, so I'm self-taught when it comes to this literature analysis, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there going, "Oh yeah, it shows." But this sort of encyclopedic mind, I have only seen in the encyclopedic novel. Like I've seen it
Mm.
in Pynchon, I've seen it in Thomas Mann, I've
Hmm.
seen it in Powers and DeLillo, individuals like that. I have not seen it in aside from Borges, and maybe there are others like Borges that I need to know about. So truncated, so packed together. I mean,
Hmm. Well,
if
this
we
is
were
this is the
to be,
same man who said that he was going to write an encyclopedic novel. He said, "Oh, I'm going to write this epic." This is just a little like aside that he might have had a conversation with somebody, but he said, "Oh, I'm going to write this wonderful encyclopedic novel. It's going to be about gauchos and love and patricide, fratricide. It's going to be intense." And he's like, I thought about it, I thought about it, I thought about it, and then one day I sat down and I wrote a review about it, and I was satisfied. So this is we're
yeah,
dealing with we're dealing with a man who is just like all about concision, and it's all just about, well, I'd rather just explain it to you in a paragraph or two, and that's it. I don't want
as
to.
as someone who's read a lot of encyclopedic novels, you know, I mean, I'm thankful that he distills it like this because when you're reading encyclopedic novels, you'll go hundreds of pages with nothing really jumps out at you. It just seems like babbling dialogue. And then you'll have an author like bury something very important in there. And I appreciate Borges because he serves it up to you on a silver platter.
Hmm.
And to be honest, if tonight we were tasked with talking about the Magic Mountain, which I think is a fantastic book,
Hmm.
I probably would have more to say about this Borges piece.
Mm.
Now, there's some great things going on in the Magic Mountain, but there's probably like, in my opinion, and I just there's probably 400 or 500 pages of like dead air, you know.
Hmm.
So, but
Sure.
I know, like the man scholars out there are like, "Boo, you can't say that," and I probably will change my mind in 10 years. I probably will, but right now, as much as I love the Magic Mountain, and as much as I think it is relevant to our current live situation.
Hmm.
Okay. I'm talking the date today
Yes.
is May 17th, 2021. You figure it out.
Okay. As much as it's that, yes.
Yeah. I know no one's going to go read the Magic Mountain. That's a challenge. It's a
No, it's a
challenge,
big
people.
book.
Go, yeah, it's a big, big. Go do it. Go do it. See what I'm trying to get at here. Um, you know, these truths are put into these big books and no, it's too hard. I don't, you, you all don't care enough to go find it.
I don't
And
know if it's.
I'm just saying, I'm trying to challenge people.
Oh,
Go,
I
re-
know, I know, I
I'm
know.
just, I'm throwing down the gauntlet. Can you read the
Oh,
Magic Mountain?
but to read the Magic Mountain. Well, yeah.
Go
Take
read
take
it.
the summer, or whatever season it is to read it.
Go,
Because I haven't.
go
Um,
do it, man. Go do it. You'll know what I'm talking
yeah.
about. Go do it. Go do it.
Okay. Okay. I'll give it a shot. But I think maybe it's also, I don't know, just to continue to end this. I feel like I keep saying, "Oh, these are my final words," but we keep going. I think it might be something also, for talking just about Borges being someone who's encyclopedic yet concise. I think it's maybe um, it's that he tends to write with ideas more than words, if that makes sense. I don't think he is one so much for, like you said, maybe fluff, or like plot points and dialogue of like just meandering lengths and relations of that much, but he's very much a idea oriented kind of writer, and I think that kind of shows in something like this essay, where I think this is where it kind of gives you an idea of like, oh, this is what's behind these great works such as Pierre Menard, author of the Quixote, and Garden of Forking Paths, that there's something going on here where he is more interested in ideas behind the stories he's telling more so than the actual details, But I think that's why it's so concise. It's just like this happened and that happened, and then you're like, "Whoa, what is that
Nah,
that happened?" And
he may
he is
use
very by concision. He is precise, and
he may
I think.
use fewer words, but I'm
Mhm.
telling you, he's speaking in code. He's using passwords,
Yeah,
and
ideas
I've
and
pointed
logic and yeah,
it
all
just
these.
he's using trust me, he's using passwords, and for those who are at a certain level of consciousness will recognize the passwords, and those who aren't won't. And what I'm trying to say to you is he has riddled this thing with passwords. And for the uninitiated person, they may just be like any other word. But I'm telling you, he's very deliberate. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's opening up further worlds for those who want the truth. It's there,
I
and
I yeah, maybe. Yeah,
I'm
I
telling
don't
you,
know
it's
what's in his
there.
mind. I don't know what's in his
I
mind, to be
I know what it,
honest.
I know what's in his mind. I can see the passwords.
To me, he is someone that believes in everything. I think he even, when somebody asked him, like, do you believe in God or do you believe in, like, what exactly is your religious connotation? He's just like, I believe in everything. So it's this agnostic idea of the world. So at least when I read Borges, I just see there's just all of these different ideas and connections going on that he makes and references, and everything is almost fair game for him. And I think that's why I love him so much as a writer, is that he just opens the door to all of these different ideas, philosophies, literature, um, poetry, just everything, and mythology. It just runs the gamut. I mean, I think that's why, again, uh, Umberto Eco mentioned him as like the World Wide Web, like the real thing, where it does feel like an encyclopedia or a World Wide Web in of itself, of himself, where it's just everything is contained in these essays, in these fictions, in his poetry, that it's just so hard to grasp who the man is or what he's trying to say, if not everything, if not just look at the world and everything that is part of it.
I'm telling you, you'll you get to a certain level of understanding. It's quite clear what he's trying to say.
All
But
right. All
but
right.
unfortunately, I can't say it.
Okay. Okay.
But I
That
think
sounds
the
good.
intelligent listener will be able to piece it together. So,
That's
anyway,
okay.
it's not for everybody.
That's
So,
all right.
anyway,
Might not be for
uh,
me. But Luke, this was awesome. I'm glad we were able to talk about this piece. That was a wild conversation. There's so many different things I didn't think about with this piece that we kind of brought to attention. It was super interesting.
dude, I didn't even use like a third of my notes. So,
Oh,
which is good for, I could have talked about this thing for like 5 hours.
yeah.
Anyway, well, thank you, CJ.
Of course.
I gotta, I gotta do something about my oblique strain. I need some dinner,
Yes.
and you gotta go to bed, my friend.
Yes, exactly. I just have to have that Kafka-esque deal with mowing the lawn tomorrow. So
And I hope you don't wake up a beetle.
no, I will not. I'll try not to. I'll see.
Okay,
But thankfully, we're in quarantine, so nobody's gonna notice because I'll turn off my video camera when I'm working remotely. So I'll be good to go with that. So nobody will, since I work remotely, nobody will know I'm a beetle. So I'll be good
that
to go.
that would be totally hysterical if someone made a YouTube video where they're in like a Zoom meeting and they show up as Gregor Samsa the beetle. Like,
I
oh
think
my,
I've seen I think I've seen a meme where somebody says like it's the beginning lines of the Metamorphosis, and it's just like, and he woke up as a beetle and he's like, it's okay, I just am going to not put the video on for my Zoom meetings, and everything was fine. And it was just like, well, yeah, of course. It's like, well, I'm not going to put my video on, and life will continue as normal. Might
dude,
as well be a dog.
someone has to make that meme because like the metamorphosis meme is like out there, and so
Yes.
like someone just needs to take that meme and put it into like a Zoom call box, and
Uh,
like the joke just writes itself.
Yes, exactly. Oh gosh, and then that will be that will be our contribution, and then there'll be Kafka and his precursors, and then there's those guys who made that meme. That will be our contribution to
Yeah.
this list. Oh gosh.
Go do it. Go do it. All right, let's bring this to an end. I think we've been going for like 2 hours. I'll talk to you later. Okay, CJ?
Yep. Awesome.
All
Thanks,
right.
Luke.